She dropped her clipboard the moment she heard the last car pull out of the hotel parking lot. The sound of tires on wet pavement faded into nothing, and the silence that followed was so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. Sarah didn't wait. She never waited too long. Waiting meant thinking, and thinking meant talking herself out of the one thing that made her feel like she was truly alive. She was 23 years old, and she had been working at the Grandeur Palace Hotel for 2 years and 4 months. She knew every inch of that building, the way the third-floor hallway smelled faintly of old wood polish and fresh linen, the exact step on the east staircase that groaned if you put your full weight on it, the way the light in the lobby changed from gold to silver when a cloud passed over the moon. She knew all of it, the way you know a place when you spend more time there than you do in your own home. Her title was Junior Event Coordinator, which was a polished name for a job that involved carrying things, arranging things, cleaning things, and making sure that other people's celebrations went smoothly, without anyone ever noticing the girl holding everything together behind the scenes. She was good at being behind the scenes. She had been practicing it her whole life. Sarah grew up in a house on Carver Street, where the walls were thin and the arguments were loud. Her mother, Frances, was a quiet woman who had learned to fold herself smaller every year, like a piece of paper folded so many times it no longer remembered its original shape. Her father, Glenn, had not been a bad man in the dramatic way that bad men are shown in films. He was simply absent, not only when he finally left for good when Sarah was 11, but in all the years before that too. He sat at the dinner table and looked past everyone. He came home and went straight to his chair. He never once asked Sarah how her day was, and she had spent years trying to figure out whether that was cruelty or simply something missing in him that she could never name. She had one older brother, Colin, who got out early by joining the military at 18. He sent money home when he could, and called on holidays. Sarah loved him, but she also knew that his leaving had made her the one who stayed, and staying had cost her things she was only beginning to understand as an adult. She grew up making herself easy. Easy to overlook, easy to dismiss, easy to leave behind. She was not unpleasant. People liked Sarah in the casual, surface-level way that people like a comfortable chair. They didn't think about it much, but they were glad it was there. She was helpful and dependable, and never made a scene. She laughed at the right moments and went quiet at the others. She learned to read a room the way other people read books, for survival. What nobody knew, not her colleagues, not her mother, not even her best friend Priya, who had known her since they were 14, was that Sarah felt things so deeply that she sometimes had to press her hand flat against her chest just to keep everything from spilling out. She felt music the way other people felt weather. It moved through her. A particular song on a gray afternoon could undo 2 weeks of careful composure in 60 seconds. She could be standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, and a melody from a speaker somewhere above the shelves would stop her completely. She had cried over songs she had never even heard the lyrics to, because the notes alone were enough. She had always wanted to dance. As a child, she used to spin in the backyard until the world blurred, and she couldn't tell where the grass ended and the sky began. Her mother had enrolled her in a community dance class for 3 weeks when she was 9, and those 3 weeks had been the most purely joyful of her childhood. But the class cost money they didn't reliably have, and one day her mother simply didn't take her back, and neither of them talked about it afterward. So she carried it the way she carried most things, quietly and alone. The ballroom at the Grandeur Palace was called the Ivory Hall. It was the largest of the hotel's event spaces, a long, high-ceilinged room with pale marble floors and 2 tiers of crystal chandeliers that could be dimmed from a panel near the service entrance. The walls were cream and gold, the kind of old-fashioned elegance that made people feel like they were stepping into a painting. During events, it held up to 400 guests. Sarah had managed dozens of weddings, galas, anniversary dinners, and charity fundraisers in that room. She had swept up after every one of them. The first time she stayed late in the Ivory Hall was not a choice. It was a Thursday in November, 2 weeks after she started the job, and she had missed the last bus by 4 minutes. She had stood outside in the cold for 20 minutes before going back inside, because the hotel manager had already left, and she didn't want to explain herself to the night security guard, a tired man named Garrett who she had only spoken to twice. She had gone back to the ballroom simply because it was warm. The cleaners had already been through, and the space was empty and still, lit by the ambient light coming through the tall windows that faced the courtyard. The chandeliers were off, The chairs were stacked. The decorations from the evening's charity dinner had been cleared away. She had sat on the edge of the low stage at the far end of the room and taken out her phone to call Priya for company while she waited for her brother to come pick her up. But then she had accidentally pressed play on a song she had saved weeks ago and never listened to. It started slow, with just a piano. Then strings came in, quiet and deliberate, like something leaning toward you in the dark. And before she even realized what she was doing, Sarah had stood up. She did not do anything elaborate. She just moved. Her arms lifted. Her feet found a rhythm. She turned once, slowly, in the pale light from the courtyard windows. The marble floor was cool, even through her flat shoes. The room was so quiet that she could hear the song from her phone, filling the space, in a way that made the ivory hall feel, just for a moment, like it belonged to her. Colin picked her up 40 minutes later. She was sitting on a bench in the hotel lobby, perfectly composed. She did not tell him what she had done. She did not tell anyone. But she thought about it for the rest of the week. The next Friday after a wedding reception, when the last guest staggered toward the elevator and the catering staff finished loading their vans and drove away, Sarah told Garrett she had forgotten her scarf in the storage room near the ivory hall and would only be a minute. Garrett waved her through without looking up from his phone. She did not look for a scarf. She went to the ballroom. She stood in the center of the marble floor, pressed play on her phone, and this time she danced for nearly 30 minutes. She did not know the names of the steps she was doing. She had not been taught. She simply moved in a way that felt honest, arms wide, then pulled in close, head tipped back, feet finding patterns on the floor that she hadn't planned. She was not performing. There was no one to perform for. She was only being, in the most unguarded way she knew how. When she finally stopped, she was breathing harder than she expected. Her face was warm. Something in her chest felt looser, like a door that had been stuck for years had finally been nudged open. She walked home that night, it was only 20 minutes, and went to bed without eating dinner. Not because she was sad, but because she felt too full of something to add anything else to it. After that, it became a routine. Not every night, only Fridays, when the biggest events ran longest, and the cleanup lasted until well past midnight, giving her a natural reason to still be in the building. She learned which security rounds Garrett made, and when. She learned that the storage room door could be propped with a folded piece of cardstock, so it didn't click when she pushed it open. She learned that the ballroom's acoustic was best when the ventilation system had powered down, around 12:30 in the morning, because then the music from her phone filled the space with a clarity that made her feel like she was inside the song. She built a playlist over several months. It was long and completely without logic in terms of genre. Old jazz sat beside quiet pop songs. A film score she had heard once and spent 3 days tracking down. A folk singer her mother used to play on Sunday mornings when she was a child. The only thing the songs had in common was that they all made something shift behind Sarah's ribs when she listened to them. She danced to all of them. She never danced in front of a mirror. She never filmed herself. She had no desire to be watched or evaluated or improved. She simply moved. Sometimes she laughed out loud in the empty room because a certain moment, in a certain song, caught her by surprise. Once she sat on the marble floor in the middle of a slow melody and cried for reasons she couldn't fully explain, and then got up and kept going. She kept that version of herself completely separate from everything else. The Sarah who organized table settings and printed seating charts and said, "Absolutely, of course," to guests who made unreasonable requests, was one person. The girl in the ivory hall after midnight was someone else. Or maybe, she sometimes thought, she was the original version of herself, the one that had existed before she learned to fold herself small. At work, she was reliable and almost invisible. She had applied for a senior coordinator position 8 months into her time at the hotel and been turned down. The role went to a man named Jeffrey, who had been with the company for 6 months less than she had, but spoke much louder in meetings. She had applied again the following spring and been told that they were going in a different direction. She had not asked what that meant. She had nodded and returned to her desk and done her job exactly the way she always did. Priya, who worked as a nurse at the hospital across the city, told her she was too patient with people who didn't deserve it. "You keep giving them good work, and they keep rewarding the people who just talk about doing good work," Priya said one evening over takeout in Sarah's small apartment. "You have to be louder, Sarah. You have to take up space." Sarah had agreed, because that was easier. She did not know how to explain that taking up space felt like standing on a bridge over very deep water. Not impossible, but requiring a courage she hadn't yet figured out how to locate. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had once been better than it currently was. The radiator made noise in winter. The kitchen window looked directly into the window of the building next door, so she kept the blind down most of the time. She had made it as comfortable as she could, a good blanket on the couch, a small bookshelf she had painted herself, 3 plants on the windowsill that she talked to more than she would ever admit. She ate dinner alone most evenings. She read before bed. She texted Priya, and sometimes Colin. She watched shows on her laptop and sometimes fell asleep with it still playing. She had a life that, if you described it plainly, sounded ordinary, to the point of dullness. And yet she was not unhappy, not exactly. She was something more complicated than unhappy. She was unfound. She was a person who had not yet been shown to herself. The dancing was the closest she came to understanding who she might actually be. On the 3rd Friday of February, 10 months into her secret ritual, Sarah arrived at the Ivory Hall at 12:47 in the morning. The night had been long, a 40th birthday party that had run over by nearly 90 minutes, a guest who had argued about the floral centerpieces, a tablecloth situation that had required swift creative problem-solving she would never receive credit for. She was tired, in a way that went past physical. She was tired in her personality. She changed out of her work flats in the storage room and put on the soft shoes she had started keeping in her bag on Fridays. She pushed open the ballroom door. The Ivory Hall was dark except for the light from the courtyard, which had been supplemented that evening by a newly installed exterior lamp that threw a pale silver rectangle across the marble floor. The room smelled of recently cleared plates and fresh flowers from the party, the scent already beginning to fade. She walked to the center of the floor. She pressed play. The first song that came on was one she had not planned. Her phone had been on shuffle, and it was slow and achingly full. The kind of song that felt like it was reaching for something it couldn't quite grasp. She stood still for a full 10 seconds, just listening. Then she raised her arms, and she began to move. She was not thinking about Jeffrey who had taken her promotion. She was not thinking about the guest who had been difficult, or the bills due at the end of the month, or the unanswered message from her mother sitting at the bottom of her phone screen. She was not thinking at all. She was only in the music, in the silver light, in the cool air of that enormous and empty room. And she was more fully herself than she had been at any point since the previous Friday. She did not know she was being watched. She had no reason to know. The hotel's mezzanine level, a curved walkway above the ballroom, used during larger events to accommodate overflow guests, was not visible from the floor in low light. From up there, you could see the entire ballroom spread out below like a stage. Every inch of the marble floor, every shadowed corner, every crystal drop of the dimmed chandeliers catching the pale light. A man stood at the railing of the mezzanine level and did not move. He had been standing there for 11 minutes. He had come down from the penthouse because he couldn't sleep, and he had taken the mezzanine route because it was quieter than the main corridors. He had heard music, thin and small from a phone speaker, but somehow filling the high space of the Ivory Hall in a way that was impossible to ignore. He had looked down, and then he had not been able to look away. The girl on the marble floor had no idea anyone was watching her, and that was the first thing that struck him. Not the dancing itself, but the absolute freedom of a person who believes they are completely alone. There was no performance in her. There was no careful arrangement of herself for an audience. She moved the way people cry in private, or laugh at something they find funny when no one else does, with the whole of herself, because she had no reason to hold anything back. He watched her spin, slow and wide, her arms open to the empty room. He watched her pause when the song built to something, her head tilted up as if she were listening for the precise moment to move again. He watched her stumble very slightly on a turn, and then recover with a small, private laugh he was too far away to hear but could see in the shape of her face. He stood at that railing until the song ended. He did not go down. He walked back to the penthouse slowly, and for a long time after he lay in bed with the lights off and the city spread outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, he found he was still thinking about a girl dancing alone in an empty room. Completely happy, completely unaware, and more alive than anyone he had encountered in a very long time. His name was Damien Voss, and this was the beginning of something neither of them had planned. The night Damien Voss arrived at the Grandeur Palace Hotel, it was raining so hard that the doorman had to hold the entrance open with both hands to stop the wind from slamming it shut. Damien walked through without looking up. He had 2 bags, a briefcase, and no interest in the weather. He was 36 years old, though people who didn't know him often guessed older, because there was something settled and weathered in his face that had nothing to do with age, and everything to do with the kind of life he had lived. He had the kind of height that made him easy to spot in a crowd, and a manner that made people instinctively move out of his path. Not from fear, exactly, but from a sense that he was always going somewhere with a purpose, and that getting in the way of that purpose would be a poor decision. The Grandeur Palace had been his choice. He could have stayed anywhere in the city. He had more than enough resources to afford the most expensive suite in the most exclusive building in any neighborhood he preferred. But he had chosen the Grandeur Palace because it was quiet, because it was old enough to have been built when walls were thick, and soundproofing was a natural consequence of good construction, and because he had stayed there twice before and found the staff to be professional in the way he valued most, which was to say, they left him alone. He was in the city for business. His company, Voss Capital, was one of the more significant private investment firms operating across the country, and a deal had been progressing for 3 months that required his personal presence for the final stages of negotiation. He expected to be in the city for approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks had a way of becoming something else when Damien was involved. He had learned not to make solid predictions. He took the penthouse suite on the 14th floor. It was a 4-room arrangement with windows on 3 sides that offered a view of the city that was, he acknowledged privately, one of the more impressive he had seen. The living room faced a stretch of downtown that glittered particularly well in rain. He stood at the window for a while that first night, still in his coat, not bothering to unpack yet, watching the streets below flood with reflections. He did not call anyone. He did not order food, though he had not eaten since mid-afternoon. He sat in the chair near the window and read through documents on his tablet until his eyes protested, and then he turned off the light and tried to sleep. He was not a good sleeper. He had not been since he was in his mid-20s. His mind operated at a pace that did not easily downshift, and the quiet that should have been restful was often just a space where his thoughts got louder. He had tried various remedies over the years, most of which worked for a short time and then stopped. His current approach was simply to accept it, to get up, move around the suite, read, and wait for his body to decide it was done for the night. That first week at the Grandeur Palace was dense with meetings. He moved through the days with the focused efficiency that had made him successful. Breakfast alone with his phone, a car to whatever office or boardroom needed him, evenings reviewing what had been discussed, and planning the next steps. His assistant, a sharp and organized woman named Claire, who worked remotely and communicated primarily through precise voice messages, handled the logistics of his schedule. He trusted her completely, which was unusual for him. He ate dinner in his suite most nights. He ordered from the hotel kitchen, choosing the same 3 or 4 items in rotation, because he had found things he liked, and saw no particular reason to spend mental energy on variety when he had other things to think about. He was not a man who required much in the way of entertainment or social company. He had, over the years, become genuinely comfortable in his own presence, which he recognized was something many people never managed. He had friends, a small number of them, real ones, the kind that had known him long enough to hold the shape of who he was before he became who he was now. He called them occasionally, met them for meals when their schedules aligned, and found their company genuinely restoring, in a way that most interactions were not. But he did not miss people when they were absent. He could spend a week alone in a hotel suite and feel no particular lack. On the 5th night, he couldn't sleep. It was just past midnight. He had read until the words started blurring, and then he had put the tablet down and lain in the dark for 40 minutes before accepting that sleep was not going to cooperate. He got up, pulled on dark trousers and a gray shirt, left the jacket hanging over the chair. He had found, in hotels particularly, that walking the quieter corridors helped. Not the main hallways, which were too bright and too open. The secondary routes, service corridors, mezzanine walkways, areas that weren't designed for guests, but were accessible if you knew the layout. He had spent his first 2 days quietly mapping the layout of the Grandeur Palace, in the way he naturally mapped every building he spent significant time in, not because he was suspicious, simply because understanding the space he occupied was a habit that had served him well his whole life. He took the back stairs to the mezzanine level, which curved around the interior above the Ivory Hall Ballroom. At this hour, the hotel was almost entirely still. The occasional distant sound of an elevator, the muffled bass of someone's television through a wall, the building breathing. He was moving along the mezzanine walkway when he heard it. It was thin, the kind of sound that comes from a phone speaker when the volume is turned up past what the speaker can cleanly handle. Music. And beneath it, the quiet rhythm of feet on a hard floor. He stopped. He did not know why he stopped. He could have continued walking. He could have assumed it was cleaning staff finishing up, or a maintenance worker with a radio. He could have looked straight ahead and kept going. Instead, he moved to the railing of the mezzanine and looked down. The Ivory Hall was dim. The courtyard lights outside pressed silver through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of pale light across the marble. The chandeliers above were off. The ballroom was empty of everything. Tables, decorations, guests, evidence of the evening's event. Except for one girl. She was in the center of the floor, and she was dancing. Damien stood very still. He was not a man who reacted to things quickly. He assessed first. He observed. And what he observed now was something that took him a moment to fully understand, because it was so different from anything he usually encountered, that he needed a second to calibrate. This girl, young, dressed in work clothes still, her hair pulled back but coming loose around her face, was dancing as though no other human being existed anywhere in the world. She was not dancing for anyone. She was not performing. She was not doing something she intended to be seen doing. She was simply moving, and the movement came from somewhere so genuinely inside her that watching it felt like accidentally reading someone's diary. He did not look away. He observed specific things, because observation was what he did. He noticed that she paused when the music built, as if she were waiting for exactly the right moment to commit to a turn. He noticed that she sometimes smiled at nothing, not at him, not at any audience, just at a particular note, or the way a moment in the song resolved. He noticed that she stumbled once, slightly, and then laughed, a small private laugh that he was too far above to hear, but he could see it in the way her shoulders shook and her face changed. He noticed that she looked, standing in that pale silver light, in that enormous empty room, completely at home, in a way she did not appear to be anywhere else. He didn't know yet that he had seen her before. It was not until the following morning, when he passed through the hotel lobby, and saw her standing at the front desk, organizing a folder of documents, with the careful speed of someone who has done a task so many times, it has become automatic. It was not until he saw her face, in that ordinary daylight context, that something shifted. He paused, looked again. She did not notice him looking. She was talking to a colleague, pointing at something in the folder, her expression focused and efficient, and entirely without the quality he had seen in her the previous night. In this version, she was contained, professional, invisible, in the way that competent people in service roles are taught to be, present without imposing, helpful without claiming space. He walked on. But he thought about it. He thought about it during his morning meetings, which was unusual for him. Damien was capable of extreme focus, and focus did not typically share its space. Yet there it was, the image of her in the ballroom, superimposed briefly over the papers in front of him, the figures on the screen, the voices in the room. He told himself it was because he couldn't sleep again, and that was true. He did not examine the additional truth that he had noticed, across the week, which night was the hotel's busiest event night, and what time the staff typically finished clearing the main ballroom. She was already there when he arrived. She came in through the service door, and she moved to the center of the floor, with a directness that said she had done this before, that this was not a spontaneous act but a practiced one. She took off her work shoes and put on different ones from her bag. She spent a moment with her phone, selecting something specific. She stood still for a breath. Then the music began, and she moved into it. This time he watched for longer. He watched the way she carried herself when she thought she was completely alone, the slight roll of her shoulders when a song she particularly loved came on, the way she occasionally closed her eyes and simply turned in place, not dancing so much as receiving the music. He watched the way her face changed through the playlist, light with something that might have been mischief during a quick tempo piece, then stilled and almost solemn during something that built slowly. He watched a girl give herself permission to be fully herself, in secret, in a room she borrowed every Friday, because she had no other place in the world, that belonged to her in that way. He stood at the railing with his hands loose at his sides, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not attraction, that came later, and in a different form than he would have expected. What he felt first was a kind of ache, the way you feel when you see something beautiful that you had forgotten you were capable of responding to. He had been rich for a long time. He had been powerful, by most definitions, for nearly as long. He had stayed in beautiful rooms and beautiful places, and sat across tables from remarkable people, and done things he was proud of, and made decisions that had shaped industries, and been right about things that mattered. And none of it, had ever produced the feeling he was watching this girl produce in herself through 20 minutes of private dancing in a borrowed ballroom. He went back to the penthouse and stood at the window for a long time. He was not the kind of man who ignored things he found interesting. He was not the kind of man who walked past something significant and told himself it wasn't his concern. He had built everything he had built by paying attention to what other people dismissed, by finding value in places other people hadn't thought to look. He was careful, though. He was always careful. He did not go down to the ballroom. He did not make himself known. He simply stood at the railing 2 more times over the following 2 weeks, watching a girl dance alone after midnight, and he let the certainty build quietly in him that whatever this was, it was not nothing. He asked Claire to find out, discreetly, the name of the junior event coordinator on staff. Claire asked no questions, because that was part of why he trusted her. She sent back a name within 24 hours. Sarah Linwood. He said the name once, in the quiet of the penthouse suite, not because he thought anything in particular would come of saying it, but because he was a man who believed that the right response to anything significant was to begin with paying it attention. The next Friday, he watched again, and this time, when the song ended and she stood still on the marble floor, with her head bowed and her chest rising and falling from the exertion, he felt with a quiet certainty that had nothing to do with impulse and everything to do with the way he understood people. He felt that he was going to know her, not as the polished, contained, and visible girl she was during the day, the real one, the one he had only ever seen alone in the dark, dancing to songs no one else knew she loved. He just hadn't figured out the right way in yet. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Voss Capital's local partner office smelled of leather chairs and yesterday's coffee, and Damien had been sitting in it for 2 hours longer than the meeting was supposed to last. Across the table, a man named Porter Whitfield was explaining, for the 4th time, why the projected return figures were actually more conservative than they looked on paper. Damien listened. He did not interrupt. He watched Porter Whitfield's hands when he talked, because hands were where honesty leaked out. Porter Whitfield's hands were doing too much. Damien made a note on the yellow legal pad in front of him, something that looked like a number to anyone watching, but was simply a reminder to himself. Ask Claire to pull the consolidated accounts from 2021, not just the most recent 3 quarters. The deal he was here for was a significant one, a portfolio acquisition that his firm had been evaluating for several months. It wasn't the largest deal he had ever done, but it was complicated, in ways that required his personal attention, because 3 of the partner companies involved had histories that didn't perfectly align, and somebody had to sit in rooms like this one and make sure the numbers told the same story on Tuesday that they had told on the previous Thursday. He was good at this work. He had always been good at it, not because he was particularly brilliant in any single area, but because he had a patience for complexity that most people lacked, a willingness to sit with something long enough to understand it fully, before deciding what it meant. His own history with money was something he rarely spoke about and almost never explained, because he had learned that people either didn't believe it or over-dramatized it, and he preferred neither. The short version was that his father had run a small construction supply company for 20 years, and it had been a good enough business, steady, unremarkable, the kind of business that didn't make you rich but kept a family comfortable. His father had died when Damien was 19, and in settling the estate Damien had discovered, almost accidentally, that the business had been undervalued by everyone involved by roughly 4 times. He had been young enough to be angry about it and old enough to do something about it. He spent the next 4 years doing something about it, and those 4 years laid a foundation he had been building on ever since. He had not started from nothing. He was honest about that, at least with himself. He had started from something, a small, overlooked something that other people had dismissed, that had shaped the way he worked for the rest of his career. He trusted the overlooked. He was suspicious of the obvious. He thought about that sometimes. in the context of Sarah Linwood, though he would not have framed it so neatly at this point in the story. He simply found himself, in the days that passed, thinking about her more than he expected to. It was not uncomplicated, this thinking. He was aware of the things that made the situation unusual. She was significantly younger than he was, not overwhelmingly so, but enough that it was a fact worth noting. She worked in the hotel where he was a guest. He had watched her without her knowledge, which was something he turned over in his mind, with a seriousness that he brought to most ethical considerations, not with dramatic guilt, but with genuine examination. He had seen her through a glass railing. He had not sought her out. He had not followed her, or gone to any particular effort to observe her. She had been there, and he had been there, and he had not looked away. That was the truth of it. But he was also honest enough to acknowledge that he had gone back, that there had been intention in the returning, and that intention meant something. He resolved two things: that he would not go back to the mezzanine to watch her again without finding some other way to make himself known to her first, and that he would not manufacture something false or convenient to accomplish that. If there was a legitimate reason for their paths to cross, he would take it. If there wasn't, he would leave it alone and see if the feeling faded. The feeling did not fade, and on the Tuesday of his third week at the hotel, a legitimate reason arrived, though it arrived in an inconvenient form. The Voss Capital team was hosting a small working dinner in the hotel's private dining room. 10 people, nothing elaborate, just a working meal between partners and their legal teams. Damien had not been particularly involved in the logistics. That was Claire's territory, and the hotel's event team's territory. But Claire called him at 2 in the afternoon with a problem. The private dining room had experienced a plumbing issue earlier that day. It was resolved, but the room was temporarily unavailable, and the hotel was offering an alternative space. The alternative was one of the smaller event rooms on the second floor. The hotel's coordinator would reach out to confirm the transfer of arrangements. 15 minutes later, Damien's phone showed a new message from the hotel's general inbox. It was brief, professional, and concluded with the name of the coordinator handling the rearrangement: Sarah Linwood. He sat with his phone for a moment. Then he did something he almost never did in professional settings. He responded to the logistics email himself, instead of forwarding it to Claire. He confirmed the room change, asked 2 specific questions about the table arrangement, and requested a brief meeting to go over the dietary preferences list in person. He arrived at the meeting 10 minutes early, which he did deliberately, and waited in the smaller event room, standing near the window. She came in at exactly the scheduled time, a folder under her arm and her phone in her hand, already talking, not to him but into the phone, wrapping up what seemed to be another call. She ended it smoothly and looked up. For the space of 2 full seconds, she stopped. It was brief enough that a less attentive person would not have noticed it. But Damien noticed everything, and what he saw in those 2 seconds was something specific, not just recognition. She clearly recognized his name as a hotel guest, possibly as a business figure, but something more personal, a flash of something she immediately and expertly folded back behind a professional expression. She recovered completely. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I'm Sarah Linwood. Thank you for meeting in person. I know it's an unusual step for a room change, but I wanted to make sure we get the arrangements exactly right for your team." Her voice was calm and clear. She moved to the table and opened the folder, spreading out a diagram of the proposed setup with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested she had done this hundreds of times. He did not sit down immediately. He let her walk him through the layout, the seating arrangement, the menu adjustments she had already anticipated based on the original booking notes. She was thorough. She anticipated questions before he asked them. She pointed out one potential issue with the lighting on the western side of the room. It could create glare during certain times of the evening, and proposed a solution she had already confirmed with the facilities team. "You thought of that before I mentioned it," he said. "It's something that comes up fairly often in this room," she said. "It helps to flag it in advance." "Most people don't," he said. She looked up briefly. Something moved across her face, a kind of careful assessment, the look of someone trying to determine whether a comment is a compliment, a test, or simply an observation. She settled on treating it as the latter. "It's easier to prevent a problem than apologize for one," she said, and went back to the diagram. He asked the 2 questions from the email. She answered them both completely. He asked 2 more, neither of which was strictly necessary but both of which were legitimate. and she answered those as well. He noted that she was good at her job in a way that was quiet and entirely uninterested in credit. She did not try to impress him. She did not perform competence. She simply was competent, which was, in his experience, considerably rarer. When she was done, she closed the folder. "Is there anything else you need before the dinner on Thursday?" "No," he said. "This is thorough. Thank you." She nodded, picked up her things, and moved toward the door. He noticed she had the same slightly worn flat shoes on that she wore at work. Practical, efficient. Not the shoes of someone trying to be noticed. "Miss Linwood," he said. She turned. "I'd like to know, how long have you been in event coordination?" It was a simple question. It was also an extension of a conversation she was clearly ready to end, and she knew it. He saw her register that, and he saw her decide, after a brief internal moment, to answer it. 2 years and 4 months, she said. And before that? Hospitality management course. Before that, various things. A pause. I don't think that part is particularly relevant to the table layout. He held eye contact for a moment, and then did something that surprised her. He could tell. He smiled. It was not a large smile, not something that transformed his face, but it was genuine, and it arrived without warning. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it isn't. Thank you again, Miss Linwood." She left. He stood in the event room for a while after she was gone, not looking at anything in particular, turning the conversation over in his mind, the way he turned most things over. He was not thinking about what she looked like or how she spoke or any of the surface things that people typically noted first. He was thinking about the gap he had observed, the gap between the girl on the marble floor at midnight and the woman in this room just now. Two completely different versions of the same person, and the distance between them was not dishonesty. It was something else. It was the distance between who you were when the world was watching, and who you became when it wasn't. He had the dinner on Thursday. Sarah had arranged everything exactly as she said she would, down to the adjusted lighting. He noticed her briefly, at the edge of the evening, speaking to a server near the doorway, checking something, probably, confirming a detail. She did not look toward his table. He was fairly certain she made a point of not looking toward his table. He took that as information. The following Monday, he asked Claire, very casually, whether there was anything publicly available about Sarah Linwood's work history. He framed it as background on the hotel's team, which was true enough in the loosest possible sense. Claire, who was too good at her job to ask questions that weren't her business, sent back a short document the next morning. What it contained was not dramatic. It was simply real, and reality had a way of being more affecting than drama when you paid it genuine attention. Sarah Linwood, 3 years in hospitality, 2 years and 4 months at the Grandeur Palace. Applied for a senior coordinator role twice. Passed over twice. Once for a man named Jeffrey Marsh with 6 months less experience and a significantly less detailed event portfolio. Once following an internal restructure that had quietly given the available promotion to a team member who was the direct hire of the new department manager. Her performance reviews, visible from the brief public reference she had listed on a professional profile, described her as exceptional, detail-oriented, and consistently exceeding expectations. She had been exceeding expectations for 2 years, and nobody had changed her title or her pay. Damien read the document twice. He set his tablet down. He was not by nature a person who was moved to anger on behalf of people he barely knew. But there was something about this particular piece of information that sat badly with him, not because injustice in the workplace was unusual. It wasn't. He had seen it in every industry he had ever touched. But because of the specific contrast it drew. Here was a person who was by every available measure very good at what she did, who had worked consistently and without complaint, who had applied for the recognition she deserved through the correct channels twice, and who had been dismissed twice, and who had responded to that by continuing to do good work, with no evidence of bitterness. And on Friday nights, after everyone left, she danced in the empty ballroom, because it was the only space she had that was entirely her own. He was not a man who made impulsive decisions. He was not going to arrive at her office with flowers, or make some grand gesture designed to announce himself. That was not how he operated, and it was not what this situation called for. He was going to do what he always did when he found something of genuine value that other people had overlooked. He was going to pay attention. He was going to be present, and he was going to let the real shape of things reveal itself over time. But first he needed to create a reason to be in the same room as her again. A real one. Not manufactured. Not the kind she would see through and resent. He needed something that was genuinely his to offer, and genuinely hers to take or leave. He was, after all, a guest at the Grandeur Palace Hotel for at least another 8 to 10 days. He had a team dinner, a potential cocktail event, and a possible farewell breakfast still on the schedule. He was a patient man, and he had a very clear sense, clearer than most things he had ever felt, that whatever the next move was, it needed to be honest. The light in the ivory hall did not come on all at once. It came on from one side, a slow, warm panel above the service entrance that the facilities team had apparently been meaning to fix for weeks. It illuminated the left half of the ballroom in a wide amber wash, and it happened at 12:58 in the morning, while Sarah was in the middle of a turn. She stopped so fast she nearly fell. Her heart hit the inside of her chest, like something thrown against a wall. She grabbed her phone, cutting the music, and spun to face the source of the light. Her first thought was Garrett. Her second thought was that whatever happened next, she was about to have a very uncomfortable conversation. The man standing at the far end of the ballroom was not Garrett. She knew who Damien Voss was, in the professional sense. Anyone working hospitality in this hotel knew the name of the penthouse guest who had been staying for 3 weeks, who arrived to meetings with a kind of quiet gravity that made hotel managers stand up straighter without being asked. She had managed the rearranged dinner on Thursday. She had spoken to him, briefly, professionally, in the way she spoke to all guests who required personal coordination. He had asked her questions about herself. She had shut that down. She had been polite about it, but she had shut it down. She did not need complicated guests who asked questions. And now he was standing at the far end of the ivory hall, in dark trousers and a shirt with no jacket, in the middle of the night, and he had just seen something that nobody was supposed to see. The first thing she said was, "I can explain." The second thing she said was, "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't be in here." And the third thing she said was something she would later be unable to fully reconstruct, because her thoughts were arriving too fast for her mouth to keep up with them. He watched her stumble through all of it. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He just stood at the far end of the ballroom with his hands in his pockets and listened to her explain herself, and the thing she noticed, even in the full heat of her panic, was that his expression was not what she had expected. She had expected mild amusement at her expense. She had expected the careful blankness of someone deciding whether to make trouble for her. She had not expected him to look like he was listening. "Mr. Voss," she said, landing on formality as a life raft. "I understand this looks unprofessional, and I apologize. I'll leave immediately." He said, "Don't stop on my account." She had already started toward the service door. The words stopped her. She turned back. "Excuse me?" I said, "Don't stop." His voice was calm. It was always calm, she had noticed in their previous meeting. Not the calm of someone performing composure, but the real kind. The kind that came from someone who was genuinely unbothered by most things, because they had already considered them. "You were in the middle of something." "I was in the middle of something I'm not supposed to be doing in the hotel's main ballroom at 1 in the morning, she said. "The hotel doesn't appear to be objecting. The hotel doesn't know." "No," he said. "Only me." She stared at him. He looked back at her with an expression she could not fully read. Not threatening, not warm exactly, but intent. The kind of focused attention that made the air in a room change. "Are you going to report it?" she asked. It was the most direct thing she had said. He considered for a moment. "No." "Then I should still leave," she said. "Because it isn't." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I don't do this in front of people." "I know." She looked at him. Something shifted in her chest, something uncomfortable and unidentifiable. "How long have you been here?" "Tonight?" "A few minutes," he said. She heard what he didn't say. She heard the specific brevity of that answer, the precise time frame it provided, and the time frame it didn't provide. She was good with details. It was what made her good at her job, and the detail she noticed now was that he had said tonight in a way that made it a complete sentence. "And other nights?" she said. The pause was less than a second. "Yes," he said. She felt the air leave her body slowly, like something deflating. Not dramatically. She did not make a sound or reach for something to hold on to. She simply felt the full weight of what he had just told her settle across her shoulders. She had been watched. Not once, not accidentally, more than once, deliberately, by someone who had known what they were doing and had done it anyway. How many times? She asked. 3, he said, including tonight. She said nothing. She picked up her bag from near the service door where she had left it. She put her regular shoes back on, which required sitting on the low step near the entrance, and unlacing the soft shoes she had changed into, and she did it with her face pointed down and her hands moving automatically, because she needed something to do with her body, while her mind caught up to the situation. He did not speak. He did not approach her. He waited. When she stood back up, her bag on her shoulder, she looked at him across the length of the ballroom. "This will be the last time I use this room," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Miss Linwood, thank you for not reporting it." She moved to the service door. "It wasn't nothing," he said, "what you were doing in here. I want you to know that." She stopped with her hand on the door. She did not turn around. She stood there for 5 seconds. She counted them, involuntarily, and then she pushed through the door and let it close behind her. She walked the length of the service corridor at a normal pace. She went through the staff exit, out into the cool night air, and she stood on the pavement for a moment, with her bag clutched at her side and the sound of the city somewhere around her. Then she walked home, fast. She did not cry until she was inside her apartment, and even then it was brief. Less crying, more the sudden release of pressure, the way steam escapes when a lid is finally lifted. She sat on the edge of her bed, and felt the things she usually only allowed herself to feel in the ballroom. The exposure, the rawness, the specific vulnerability of having been seen doing something that was only ever supposed to belong to herself. And underneath all of that, quieter and harder to name, something else. The way he had looked at her when he said it wasn't nothing. The way he had said she had been doing something, as if what she did in the dark and the quiet was a real thing, not an embarrassment. She was not thinking about him the way she would have thought about an interesting or attractive person. She was too busy being angry and unsettled, and too tired to untangle anything complicated, but she filed the moment away without quite meaning to. The way you store something you're not ready to look at yet. She was back at work at 9 the next morning. She had Sunday to recover, and she spent most of it doing laundry, and reorganizing her bookshelf, and calling Priya, who could tell from the first sentence that something had happened.
"Are you going to tell me?"
Priya asked. "Eventually," Sarah said. "That means it involves a man." "It doesn't involve a man," Sarah said, a beat too quickly. "Okay," Priya said, in the particular tone she used when she was filing information for later. Sarah did not tell her about the ballroom. She did not tell her about Damien Voss. She said something vague about a difficult situation at work, and Priya, who had known her long enough to understand the difference between when Sarah needed pushing and when she needed time, did not push. Damien checked out of the hotel on a Wednesday. She knew, because checkout events were tracked through the hotel's booking system, which she had access to as part of her role. He had been scheduled to stay for 3 weeks. He had stayed for 24 days. The penthouse suite was cleared and returned to standard stock late Wednesday morning. She felt nothing specific about this. She told herself she felt nothing specific about this, and she was mostly right. The work continued. A spring wedding required 3 additional tables than originally booked. A corporate conference needed a last-minute audio-visual change. Jeffrey, who had the senior coordinator title she should have had, delegated 2 of his overflow accounts to her without officially expanding her responsibilities or her pay, and she handled both accounts perfectly and without complaint, because she did not yet know how to respond differently. Priya, over dinner 2 weeks after the ballroom incident, said, "You have to stop letting people take things from you for free." "I don't let them," Sarah said. "You do. You give them everything, and then you apologize if they're not happy with it." Sarah pushed her food around her plate. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated. You're afraid," Priya said, without cruelty. "That's allowed. But at least name it correctly." Sarah did not argue. She thought about it later, in the dark, in her apartment, lying on her back, with the city making its small sounds outside the window. She thought about what it meant to be afraid, and to call it something else. She thought about how many different ways she had found, over the years, to make herself small, and call it professional, or call it patient, or call it not the right time. She thought about the ballroom, and she thought about his voice saying it wasn't nothing. She did not go back to the Ivory Hall on the next Friday. The week after that, she was scheduled for a different shift on Fridays, and wasn't in the hotel late enough. The week after that, she stood outside the service entrance for 5 minutes, keys in hand, and then went home without going in. The week after that, exactly 4 weeks after the night she had been found, she was deep in the logistics of a large anniversary gala when her phone showed an incoming call from an unknown number. She ignored it. It rang again immediately. She stepped away from the setup and answered. "Miss Linwood?" The voice was clear, calm, unmistakable. She said nothing for a full second. "Mr. Voss. I apologize for calling your direct line." Claire tracked it down through the hotel's coordination contact list, which I realize is a reasonably aggressive move. He paused. "I'm going to be back in the city at the end of this week. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. Not at the hotel. Somewhere neutral." "Why?" she said. One word. Flat. "Because I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one, not a corridor version." She stood in the hallway outside the event space, with a clipboard in one hand, and the phone pressed against her ear, and thought about it. "I have a very full schedule," she said. "I know, I'm asking for 40 minutes. She thought about Priya saying you're afraid and call it correctly. She thought about the 4 Fridays she had not gone back to the ballroom. "Thursday," she said. "There's a coffee shop on Alderton Street called Carlo's. I can be there at 4:30. 4:30 on Thursday," he said. "Thank you." He ended the call. She stood in the hallway for another moment. Then she walked back into the event space and returned to work. The florist was late, and 2 of the centerpiece vases had arrived in the wrong size, and these were the problems that needed solving right now. But somewhere underneath all of it, quietly, something that had been very still for the past 4 weeks began, tentatively, to move again. Carlo's was the kind of coffee shop that had been in the same spot for 15 years, and showed no interest in changing. The tables were heavy dark wood, the cups were thick ceramic, and the windows were the old kind that let in sound from the street in small, muffled waves. It smelled of ground coffee, and something baked with cardamom, that Sarah could never quite identify, but always found comforting. She arrived at 4:22. She chose a table near the window, not the one she usually sat at, which was in the back corner, more hidden, but one that was visible from the entrance, because she wanted the psychological advantage of having already arrived and being settled and composed when he walked in. She ordered a black coffee, which she did not normally drink, but which felt appropriately unbothered as a choice. He arrived at 4:30 exactly. He came in without a phone in his hand, which she noticed, because most people walked into rooms looking at their phones. He scanned the space once, found her, and came directly to the table, without stopping to look at the menu, or take in the environment, or do any of the small social things people did when they were slightly uncertain. He was not slightly uncertain. He sat down across from her and said, "Thank you for coming." "You said you had an apology," she said. She had decided on the way here that she was not going to be warm, and she was not going to be cold. She was going to be direct, because that was the fastest route through whatever this was. "I do," he said. "I watched you in the ballroom 3 times. The first time was genuinely accidental. I was on the mezzanine walkway and I heard music. But the second and third times were deliberate. I went back because I wanted to see again. That was not my right, and I should have made myself known the first time, rather than returning as an uninvited observer." He looked at her directly. "I'm sorry." She had prepared herself for something that required more unraveling. This was clean and direct, and left her very little to push against. "What was going through your mind?" she asked. "Those other 2 times. When you went back on purpose." He considered the question. A server appeared, and he ordered a coffee, without looking at the menu, because he had already glanced at the board by the door when he walked in. The server left. "Honestly," he said, "I was watching someone do something I hadn't seen before. Not the dancing specifically. What I hadn't seen was someone being completely, entirely themselves, with no awareness of an audience. I found it, I still find it, difficult to look away from." "That's not an excuse," she said. "No, it isn't. That's an explanation. The apology stands on its own. It doesn't need the explanation to function." He leaned back slightly. I included the explanation because I thought you deserved to know what I was actually thinking, rather than a cleaned-up version. She sat with that for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her cup, which had not cooled enough to drink yet. When I was in there, she said, carefully, that was the only place I had where where nobody expected anything from me, where I wasn't performing a version of myself that was acceptable to somebody. You took that without asking. Yes, he said, no qualifier, no but, just the word. I haven't been back since, she said. I know. He paused. I hope that changes. That room belongs to you in a way that has nothing to do with me. She looked out the window at the street. A man was walking a very old dog that moved with the careful dignity of something that had decided it would not be hurried. She watched them for a moment. Why did you call? She said. You'd already left the hotel. You could have just not called. It would have been resolved. Because leaving without addressing it felt like a convenient version of honesty, he said, and I'm not interested in those. She looked back at him. How did you find out where I worked before the hotel? A pause, brief. I asked Claire to find your professional background. She looked at your public professional profile. So you researched me? Yes. Because you watched me dance in a ballroom, and then researched my professional history. She heard how it sounded as she said it. She let it sit on the table between them. He did not look uncomfortable. You can leave if you want. I deserve that. I'm not going to tell you this was unremarkable behavior. She didn't leave. She picked up her coffee and finally took a sip. It was too strong and slightly too hot, and it required her full attention for a second, which was fine. What did you find? She asked. When Claire looked me up, something shifted in his expression. It was subtle. She would not have caught it if she hadn't been watching carefully, and she was always watching carefully. That you're significantly better at your job than your title reflects, he said, and that the people responsible for that discrepancy don't seem to notice or care. She had not expected him to say that. She had expected him to mention where she had trained, or how long she had been working, not the specific, accurate, impossible to deny thing he had just said. That happens, she said. It happens too often, he said, particularly to people who do the work without demanding the credit. I've applied twice, she said, and she was not sure why she said it. She hadn't planned to. I know. And the people who made those decisions were wrong. Simply, flatly, like stating a fact about the temperature. She felt something tighten in her chest. Not emotion exactly. Or not emotion she was going to let surface here, in this coffee shop, in front of this person. More like the physical sensation of something you've been pressing down finally pushing back. You don't know the full context, she said, carefully. No, he agreed. But I know what good work looks like, and I know the profile of someone who doesn't get recognized for it. You have both. The coffee shop made its ambient sounds around them. Someone at the counter laughed at something. The front door opened and let in a slice of street noise and then closed again. What do you want from this conversation? She said. Genuinely. What are you hoping happens? He thought about it, not performing consideration, actually considering. I'd like to know you, he said. Not the version you bring to work, the actual version. Everyone who has ever made me uncomfortable has said something like that, she said. I know, he said. I'm aware of how it sounds. I'm also aware that I have no claim on your time or your interest, and that everything I've told you today, the watching, the researching, makes a reasonable case against trusting me. He paused. I can't resolve that contradiction for you. I can only tell you that my interest is genuine, that I have no intention of making your professional life difficult, regardless of how this conversation ends, and that I'm asking for nothing more than what you're already giving me right now. She studied him. Which is what? Your real opinion of things, he said. You've been completely honest with me this whole conversation. Most people aren't, in situations like this. She thought about what Priya would say if she described this coffee shop, and this man, and this conversation. She knew exactly what Priya would say. She would say that interesting things were happening, and that Sarah needed to stop building walls at the exact speed that interesting things were arriving. She also thought about her own instincts, which were, underneath the caution and the practiced restraint, fairly reliable. She had been reading people her entire life. She had been doing it as a child to stay safe, and she had been doing it at work to stay effective, and she had gotten good at it. and what she read in Damien Voss, across this small table in a coffee shop on Alderton Street, was not what she had braced for. He was not trying to charm her. He was not managing her impression of him. He was not performing honesty. She had seen that enough in guests who wanted something from the hotel to know the difference. He was simply telling her things, at some personal cost, because he had decided that was the correct thing to do. She made a decision. It was not a large decision. It was not the kind of decision that changed anything definitively, but she made it. "I'm not very interesting," she said, "as a person, for someone like you." "That's not what I observed," he said. "What you observed was one specific thing, in one specific context," she said. "That isn't a whole person." "No," he agreed. "It's a beginning." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm usually here on Thursday afternoons. 4 o'clock, not 4:30. I order the same thing and I read for about an hour, before I have to be somewhere else." She paused. "I'm not saying you should come. I'm just telling you a fact, in case it's relevant." Something moved in his expression. Not triumph, she would have disliked triumph. Something quieter. Something that looked like it took care of itself. Like it didn't need to be shown off. "All right," he said. She finished her coffee. He did not rush her. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary talk. He asked her one question, what she was currently reading, and she told him, and he said something brief and specific about the author that suggested he had actually read the work and not just heard of it, and she filed that away. She left at 5:13. He stayed. She walked back toward the hotel for her evening shift, with her hands in her pockets and the cool air on her face, and she thought about the way the conversation had gone. She had not expected it to be honest. She had not expected him to simply admit the wrong things without excusing them. She had not expected to feel, by the end of it, that she understood more about who he was than she could account for from a 40-minute conversation. She thought about him staying at the table after she left. She had glanced through the window as she passed and seen him with his own coffee, not on his phone, just sitting, thinking, maybe, or simply being somewhere, with no audience, the way she was in the ballroom. She walked 2 more blocks before she allowed herself to acknowledge the thought clearly. He was lonely, in the same direction she was lonely. Not the same kind, not for the same reasons. But the specific quality of someone who had built a complete life that somehow still had a hollow in it. She recognized that. She had been carrying it herself for years. She pushed through the staff entrance of the hotel and went back to work. On Thursday of the following week, she was at Carlo's at 4 o'clock. She ordered her usual, a flat white with oat milk, and opened the book she was halfway through. At 4:15, the door opened, and she did not look up, because she was reading, and also because she had decided she was not going to monitor the door. He sat down across from her 4 minutes later. She finished the paragraph she was reading. Then she looked up. "I see the menu has changed since last week," she said. "Marginally," he said. "I noticed the seasonal coffee. I'm considering it." "It's too sweet," she said. "The cardamom one, on the other hand, is excellent." He ordered the cardamom coffee. It arrived, and he drank it, and he said, "You were right." "I usually am," she said, "about small things." She went back to her book. He took out his tablet. They sat in that coffee shop for 50 minutes without speaking more than another 15 sentences, and when she had to leave for a 6 o'clock function, she gathered her things and said, "Same time next week, probably." "Probably," he said. She left, and this time she did not look through the window. But she was almost smiling by the time she turned the corner, and she had enough self-knowledge to be aware of it, and not enough defensiveness left in her to care. The thing about falling into the habit of someone was that it happened before you had made any conscious decision to allow it. Sarah noticed this in the 3rd week of Thursday afternoons. She was not watching the clock while she worked, exactly, but there was a quality to Thursday mornings, a lighter texture to the hours, that she did not have on other days. She mentioned nothing to Priya, she mentioned nothing to anyone. She went to Carlo's, she sat across from Damien Voss, and they talked or they did not talk, and she went back to work. It was simple. It was, she told herself, uncomplicated. This was not accurate. The conversations had started short and careful and had, without particular announcement, grown longer and considerably less careful. Not reckless. Neither of them was the reckless kind, but more honest than she had expected. He asked questions the way certain people ask them, not to gather material for later use, or to fill air, but because he actually wanted to know the answer. He asked things like what she had found hardest about the past year, and she had answered it honestly, without knowing she was going to, until she was already speaking. He asked what she had wanted to be when she was younger, and she had said she honestly hadn't known. She had just wanted to be somewhere better, and she hadn't known what that meant, except that it was somewhere that allowed her to take up more space than her actual life did. He had said, "And do you have that now?" She had considered it carefully. "Parts of it," she said. He had nodded, as if she had said something accurate, and that accuracy was what he'd been waiting for. In return, she had learned things about him. Not everything. He was not the kind of person who laid himself out for inspection, and she respected that, because she wasn't either. But she learned that he had been close to his father in a way that his father's early death had made it impossible to fully know what to do with. She learned that he had very few people he trusted completely, and that this was not because he was suspicious by nature, but because he had a high threshold for what he considered actual trust. She learned that he read broadly, and without particular loyalty to genre, which she had not expected, and that he had once spent 3 weeks hiking alone in a national park, and considered it the most restorative experience he could remember, which she had also not expected. She learned that he did not like being photographed, which people with his level of public profile occasionally had to simply accept. She learned that he had no interest in the social events his position could have placed him at constantly, and actively declined most invitations. She learned that he had turned down an interview with a major financial publication 3 times because he found the premise of the piece, that his success was primarily attributable to a specific moment of insight, too simple to represent honestly. It wasn't one moment, he had said. It was 1,000 small, correct decisions, and several large mistakes, and a significant amount of luck, that I'm still not entirely comfortable taking credit for. Most people in your position would just take the credit, she said. Most people in my position would, he agreed. I find that kind of thing harder than it looks. She had sat with that for a while, turning it over. She understood it, actually. The discomfort of being given a narrative that was cleaner than the truth. She lived with the inverse version of it, a narrative that was smaller than the truth, that consistently undervalued what she actually was. They were, she thought, 2 people who had both ended up in the wrong size container, for opposite reasons. She started dressing differently on Thursdays. Not dramatically, she wasn't going to buy a new wardrobe for a standing coffee order, but she wore the better of her 2 cardigans, the dark one that Priya had given her for her birthday, and she made sure her hair was not just pulled back in the functional knot she used at work. She noticed herself doing this in the mirror on the 3rd Thursday morning, and stood there for a moment, assessing the evidence. She was not naive. She knew what this was. She had known, probably, since the 2nd Thursday, when she had looked up from her book and caught him looking at her, with an expression that he had not immediately put away when she noticed it. She had known, and she had continued going. And continuing to go was itself a kind of answer, even if she hadn't put words to it. She also knew what the complications were. She listed them, because she was the listing kind. He was significantly more wealthy and considerably more powerful than she was. Not the wealth specifically. She was not someone who thought about money in those terms, but the power that came with it, the difference in what their lives looked like. She had worked in hospitality long enough to know exactly what it was like to be the person in the background while people like Damien Voss occupied the foreground, and she did not have a clear picture of how you navigated from one side to the other without losing something. She was 23, he was 36. 13 years was not a canyon, but it was a landscape, and people from different parts of a landscape sometimes couldn't hear each other clearly. She did not know what he wanted. She knew what he had said, that he wanted to know her, the real version, but wanting to know someone and wanting to remain in someone's life were different things, and she was experienced enough with people choosing convenience over commitment that she did not casually assume the two were the same. And underneath all of those practical concerns, the more personal one, she had spent so long being invisible that being seen, being this specifically seen, by someone this specifically observant, felt like being handed something that might break if she held it wrong. She managed these concerns by not talking about them with anyone. This was, admittedly, not a sophisticated strategy. Priya figured it out in the 5th week. They were on the phone on a Tuesday evening, talking about nothing in particular, Priya's hospital roster, Sarah's upcoming event schedule, When Priya said, very casually, "Are you seeing someone?" "No," Sarah said. "Are you doing that thing you do where you're technically not seeing someone, but you're thinking about seeing someone, and you've rearranged your emotional furniture for them, without officially admitting it?" A pause. "That's a very specific question." "Yes," Priya said. "I know you. Who is it?" Sarah looked at the ceiling of her apartment. "It's nothing. It's a coffee shop thing." "Every significant thing starts as a nothing coffee shop thing," Priya said. "Tell me." Sarah told her. Not everything. Not the ballroom, not the watching, because that was still a thing she hadn't fully settled with herself. But the basics. The hotel guest. The apology. The Thursdays. She kept her voice level and descriptive, the same voice she used for relaying event details, because that was the voice least likely to invite the full weight of Priya's opinion before she was ready for it. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then, he apologized on his own initiative, and asked for nothing in return? "He asked to get to know me," Sarah said. "That's asking for your time. That's not nothing." Another pause. "Is he kind?" The question surprised her, because it wasn't the question she'd been preparing for. Priya had not asked whether he was impressive or financially secure, or physically attractive. She had asked whether he was kind, and Sarah sat with the question for a moment, because it deserved a real answer. "Yes," she said. "I think so. In a way that doesn't perform itself." "That's the only kind that counts," Priya said. "What are you afraid of?" "I'm not." Sarah. A beat. "I don't know how to be someone who gets to have nice things. I know how to want them, and I know how to work for them. But when something actually arrives, I keep waiting for the part where it turns out it wasn't for me." Priya was quiet for a long time, long enough that Sarah thought the call had dropped. "It is for you," Priya said finally simply. "You are allowed to let that be true." Sarah said nothing. "Let the man buy you a cardamom coffee," Priya said. "You can evaluate the rest later." She laughed. It came out more breathless than she meant it to. At work, things were also shifting, though not in a way she had invited. Jeffrey had been moved to a different department in a restructure, which left the senior coordinator role temporarily unfilled. The department manager, a woman named Lottie Hargreaves, who had only been in the role for 4 months, and had not yet formed strong opinions about anyone on her team, called Sarah in for a meeting. Lottie Hargreaves was practical and direct, which Sarah appreciated. She said, "I've been going through the event records since January. A significant portion of the accounts listed under other coordinators seem to have been handled primarily by you. Can you tell me about that?" Sarah could. She did. She was honest about it, not to be political, but because honesty was what she had, and because she had decided, partly through 5 weeks of Thursday afternoons, that continuing to be honest was the correct strategy, even when it was inconvenient. Lottie listened carefully, made notes, said she would get back to Sarah in 2 weeks. Sarah went back to her desk and did not allow herself to make any particular meaning of it, because she had been here twice before, and she knew the distance between a promising meeting and an actual outcome. But that Thursday, at Carlo's, she told Damien about the meeting, not because she needed advice, just because she was used to telling him things now, and this thing had happened, and he was the person she wanted to tell. He listened. He did not say that it was going to work out, or that she deserved the outcome she hoped for. He said, "What will you do if it goes the same way as the previous 2 times?" "Keep doing the work," she said. "And?" She looked at him. "And, probably eventually find somewhere that isn't determined to waste me." He nodded. Something in his face was careful and warm at the same time. "That's the right answer," he said. "You sound surprised," she said. "Not surprised," he said. "Glad. 2 months ago, I'm not sure you would have said that." She thought about that. He was right, which she could acknowledge without difficulty, because it was simply true. 2 months ago, she would have said she would keep doing the work and left out the second part entirely, because the second part was not the voice of someone keeping herself very small and very safe. "You've been paying attention," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked out the window. The old man with the old dog was out again. She had seen them from this table before, and she had started to notice that they came by at roughly the same time on the same days, which meant they had their own rhythm, their own small reliable pattern in the larger unpredictability of the city. She thought about patterns, about the ones she had built without realizing. The Friday ballroom, the Thursday coffee, the specific way she had learned to read the expression on a particular face that was, increasingly, among the faces she looked for in a room. "I think I've been paying attention too," she said, and she kept her eyes on the window when she said it, which meant she did not see his expression change. She felt it, though, in the small shift in the quality of the silence. She did not make it into anything larger that afternoon. She finished her coffee. She went to work. She told herself she would deal with what was happening between them in a clear and honest way when she was ready to. She was getting closer to ready. She just hadn't found the exact moment yet. And somewhere in her, the part that was still afraid, was hoping she would find it before it found her. It came from the unlikeliest direction, and it came from the most predictable one, which was the way the worst things usually arrived, wrapped in something ordinary enough that you didn't see it until you were already standing in the middle of it. Sarah was at the front desk on a Wednesday morning, collecting a set of updated menus for a Friday luncheon, when a colleague named Marcus, junior staff, 21, earnest to a fault, came up beside her. "Did you see the new security system write-up?" he asked. She had not. She had been managing 2 concurrent events and a vendor dispute, and had not had time for internal memos. "They upgraded the camera resolution in the main ballrooms," Marcus said. "Retroactively adjustable, apparently. So they went back through the stored footage for the quality review, and there was a whole thing about the mezzanine viewing angle." He stopped, looked at her. Her face had done something she hadn't managed to stop. "You all right?" "Fine," she said. "Just remembered something." She picked up the menus and walked away. She stood in the corridor outside the event coordinator office and held the menus against her chest and thought with a clarity so sharp it was almost physical. The mezzanine level. Cameras. Quality review. Stored footage. Damien had said he had been on the mezzanine. He had said 3 times. She had believed him and been upset. And then gradually, over 8 weeks of Thursdays and cardamom coffee, and a man who asked questions she hadn't expected to answer, she had moved past it. She had forgiven it in the practical sense. The sense where you decide the original act no longer defines your understanding of someone. But she had never asked the obvious question. How had he seen her well enough to form the picture he described, in a dimly lit ballroom, from a mezzanine walkway, without any closer vantage point? She went back to her desk. She opened the hotel's security system portal. She had access to it as part of her role. She sometimes needed to review footage for event-related issues, disputed damages, that kind of thing. She navigated to the Ivory Hall camera records. She found the mezzanine cameras. There were 2, one on each end, angled slightly downward toward the ballroom floor. The resolution on the archived footage was good, very good. She went to the dates. The first Friday of his stay at the hotel. She loaded the timestamp that matched approximately midnight to 1 in the morning. She pressed play, and there she was, herself, in the Ivory Hall, dancing, from above and slightly to the left, in sharper detail than she would have imagined possible from that distance and that light. The camera's low-light capability was, apparently, considerable. She watched herself for a few seconds. She had never seen herself dance. The experience was deeply strange. She could see the freedom in it, the absence of self-consciousness, the quality that Damien had described, and also the vulnerability of it, the naked, unguarded realness of it. She switched to the second date, and the third. The dates matched exactly what he had told her, 3 times, and on the third, she could see, at the far edge of the frame on the mezzanine, the still figure of a man at the railing. She closed the portal. She sat at her desk for the rest of the morning and did her work with the mechanical competence of someone whose higher processing was occupied elsewhere. She answered emails. She confirmed a vendor delivery. She went to the kitchen and made tea and drank it and made another. At noon, she went to the staff restroom and locked herself in a stall and stood very still for approximately 3 minutes, which was how long it took her to get a complete understanding of what she felt. She felt, first, a complicated grief. Not the fresh kind, but the kind that arrives when something you had already adjusted to turns out to have had a sharper edge than you thought. She had known he watched her. She had not known, or had not fully considered, that he had the kind of access to those cameras that permitted detailed viewing. There was a difference between standing on a walkway in the dark and making out a figure below, and having a clear recorded image of someone's private moment that could be replayed. She felt, second, angry. Not at the same pitch as the night in the ballroom. That had been sudden and hot. This was quieter and cooler, and therefore in some ways harder to deal with, because what she had told herself, what she had allowed herself to believe, was that she had been seen accidentally, and then deliberately but from a distance, in the way that people sometimes see things that were not meant for them, and cannot look away. That was one thing. What she was looking at now felt like something that crossed a different kind of line, even if he had never done anything harmful with it, even if the footage was only the security team's system and had never left it. She felt, third, confused about what she was actually angry at, him specifically, or the fact that she had given so much weight and meaning to his description of watching her, and now she was not entirely certain she had the whole picture of what watching had meant. She called him that afternoon. She did not wait for Thursday. He answered on the second ring, Sarah. She noted the first name use, which she had not quite given him permission for, and which he had been using for 2 weeks, and she noted that she had allowed it because it had felt, until today, like a natural evolution. She filed that detail and set it aside. Are you free to talk? She said. Yes, what's happened? I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the complete truth. A brief silence, not of preparation, she thought. Of awareness, the awareness of someone who understood that a particular kind of conversation had just begun. All right, he said. When you watched me in the ballroom, she said, did you watch me through the mezzanine cameras? Not just by standing at the railing, but through the camera footage? Do you have access to the hotel's security system? A pause, longer this time. Why are you asking? Because I checked the footage this morning, she said, and the camera resolution is good enough to see someone very clearly from above. And I'm asking you directly whether the image you have of me in that ballroom is something you saw in person or something you watched on a screen. Silence. Both, he said. She said nothing. The first time I was at the railing, he said. The second and third times, yes, I had access. Not to your personal information or any hotel guest records, but a contact in the hotel's facilities management had given me limited access to the security camera system as a security measure for my stay. I used the camera on 2 of the 3 occasions. She sat with the phone against her ear and let the information be exactly what it was, without immediately deciding how to respond to it. This was a skill she had developed early and refined through years of managing people who were unhappy about things, the ability to stay in the moment of a thing before moving to the reaction. You didn't tell me that, she said. No. When I asked you directly what happened, and how many times, you said 3 times. You said you heard music and looked down. You omitted the specific detail of the camera access. Yes, he said. That's a lie, she said. It's quiet, and it's by omission, but it's a lie. Yes. A pause. I know. Why? Because what I told you was already difficult, he said. And adding the detail of the camera felt like making it significantly worse, and I wanted. He stopped. Started again. I wanted you to be able to get past it. That was a mistake. Wanting me to get past it was not a mistake, she said. Deciding that the way to accomplish that was to leave out part of the truth was. Yes, he said again. I know that. I've known it for several weeks. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window. The street below was ordinary with afternoon activity. People with bags, a courier on a bicycle, 2 children walking with a woman who was looking at her phone. What else haven't you told me? She asked. Nothing material, he said. I haven't recorded or kept the footage. I haven't shared it or described it to anyone. The access I had to the camera system was removed when I checked out. That's not nothing material, she said. The cameras belong to the hotel. You don't determine what was or wasn't significant about your access. You're right, he said. She breathed in slowly. There was something almost difficult about being angry at someone who kept agreeing with you. It removed the friction that anger usually used to sustain itself. She recognized that and was careful not to let it shorten her legitimate feelings. I need a few days, she said. Of course. I'm not ending the conversation, she said. I'm asking for time to sit with this properly. Don't call me before Saturday. All right. She hung up. She went home that evening and cooked dinner, something she did with deliberate attention when she needed to think. The physical engagement of chopping and stirring gave her mind something to occupy its surface with, while the deeper processing happened underneath. She made pasta with the sauce she'd been making since she was 17, the one she'd learned from a neighbor whose name she had forgotten, but whose kitchen she could still perfectly recall. She called Priya. She told her everything this time. The original story, the ballroom, the watching from the mezzanine, the apology, the Thursdays, and now this. Priya listened the whole way through without interrupting, which was unusual for her, and which Sarah recognized as a sign of how seriously she was taking it. "Okay," Priya said when she was done. "Walk me through what you actually feel, not what you think you should feel. What do you actually feel?" Sarah thought about it for a real moment. "Angry," she said, "at the omission, more than the original thing. I had adjusted to the original thing. The omission means I adjusted based on incomplete information." She paused. "And underneath the angry, hurt. Because I had decided to trust him, and I had made that decision carefully. And now I find out there was something I didn't have when I made it." "Those are fair things to feel," Priya said. "I know. Do you still trust him?" Sarah turned the question over. "I trust that he's not dangerous," she said slowly. "I trust that his intentions toward me have been genuine. I trust that the things he's told me about himself are true." She paused. "I don't trust that he'll always tell me everything I need to know, if what he knows makes him look bad." "That's a very specific and accurate kind of distrust," Priya said. "Is it enough to walk away?" "I don't know," Priya said. "Is it?" Sarah looked at the steam rising from the pot. She thought about the Thursday afternoons. She thought about what it had felt like to be seen, actually seen, in a way that was not transactional or conditional. She thought about a man who had said, "I wanted you to be able to get past it," which was wrong, which was an error of judgment that came from a particular kind of fear, and she knew a lot about particular kinds of fear. "I don't want to walk away," she said. "But I need him to understand that getting me to where I am now, getting me to trust him, was not something that he had the right to shortcut, even for a good reason, especially for a good reason." "Can you tell him that?" Priya asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm going to. Saturday," she called. He answered immediately. She told him what she had told Priya, not in the same words, but the same truth. She told him that the omission had cost her something, a specific piece of her confidence in him that she had been building carefully, and that she was not going to pretend it hadn't. She told him that she understood the impulse. She understood it very well, actually, because she was a person who managed other people's comfort at the expense of her own honesty more often than she wanted to admit, but that understanding it didn't make it acceptable. She told him that she was not ending what they were building, because she believed it was worth more than one mistake, but that she needed him to understand something completely. She was not someone he could protect from information. She was someone he had to be honest with, even when honesty was inconvenient. Especially then. He listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "I hear you. I understand what I cost you. And I'm telling you now, clearly, that if I ever find myself in a position where being honest with you is harder than staying quiet, I will choose honest." "That's a significant promise," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know." A pause. "Same time Thursday?" she said. The breath he let out was quiet, but she heard it. "Same time Thursday," he said. She hung up and stood in her kitchen in the afternoon light, and felt the particular, complicated, difficult feeling of having fought for something, and won it, without the victory being simple. She had been hurt, and she had said so. She had drawn a line, and he had stood on the correct side of it. She had not folded herself small. She was still angry, a little. She expected she would be for a while. She was also still in it, which was its own kind of answer. The 3 weeks after the phone call were the most important 3 weeks in the story, and almost nothing happened in them that would be visible to an outside observer. There were no dramatic confrontations. There were no declarations. There were no large events in either direction. There were Thursday afternoons at Carlo's, where the conversation was honest, and slightly careful at first, then gradually less careful, then, by the 3rd week, entirely itself again. There was a lot of work. There was Priya. There was the long process of deciding, quietly and without ceremony, to actually claim something you had been standing next to for a very long time. The decision happened in pieces, which was probably the only way it could have happened for someone like Sarah. She did not arrive at large realizations in single moments. She arrived at them the way light moved across a room, slowly, incrementally, until the room was bright and you couldn't quite point to when it had changed. The first piece. 2 days after the Saturday phone call, she went back to the ivory hall. Not on a Friday. On a Thursday, early in the morning before the rest of the staff arrived, she used her coordinator's access to open the service entrance. She walked through the quiet building, different in the morning, softer and more golden, the chandeliers catching early light from the courtyard, and she went into the ballroom and stood in the center of the floor. She did not put on music immediately. She stood there in the morning quiet, and she looked at the room, the cream and gold walls, the pale marble, the long windows, the 2 tiers of chandeliers that she had watched blaze for hundreds of events and then go dark. She had swept this floor. She had arranged tables on this floor. She had been invisible in this room hundreds of times. And she had also been, in this room, the most purely herself she had ever been anywhere. She took out her phone and pressed play. Not the whole playlist, just one song, the first one she had ever danced to in here, the one that had started the whole thing on the night of the missed bus. She danced for 20 minutes, alone, in full morning light, with the chandeliers off and the courtyard birds audible through the glass. She kept the lights on the whole time. That was not symbolic in any theatrical way. It was just what she chose, and choosing it meant something she didn't need to name out loud. She was not hiding. The room was hers whether she hid in it or not. The second piece, Lottie Hargreaves called her back in. It had been more than 2 weeks since the initial meeting, which was longer than Lottie had suggested, and Sarah had drawn nothing from the delay. She had refused to let herself read into it in either direction. She had done her work, and she had let the outcome be what it was going to be. Lottie's office was a small room at the end of the coordinator's suite, with a window that faced the interior garden. There was a plant on the desk, a kind of succulent, well-maintained, that Sarah had noticed on her previous visit and thought well of. You could tell a lot about a person from whether their desk plant was alive. Lottie sat down and put her hands flat on the desk and said, "I want to offer you the senior coordinator role." Sarah had prepared herself for various outcomes. She had not, she discovered, fully prepared herself for this one. She absorbed it without showing it. Her face did not change, not immediately. But something behind her ribs shifted the way it had shifted in the ballroom on certain Thursday mornings. The feeling of a door that had been stuck finally giving way. "I also want to be honest about the circumstances," Lottie said. "The role should have been yours a year ago. The records are clear on that. I can't undo what the previous decisions were, but I can make the correct decision now. The salary adjustment will be applied retroactively for the past quarter." A pause. "Is that acceptable?" "Yes," Sarah said. She heard her own voice, and was slightly surprised by how steady it was. "I'd also like to talk about the event portfolio you've been managing, that was listed under Jeffrey Marsh's accounts," Lottie said. "I think some of that should be formally reallocated." They talked for 40 minutes. When Sarah walked out of the office, her job title and her pay grade had both changed. She walked back to her desk and sat down and stared at her screen for approximately 30 seconds before the full weight of it arrived. She called Priya immediately. Priya, who was between patients, answered in the hospital corridor and screamed quietly, which was the restrained version of screaming she had developed over years of needing to be professional in public spaces. "I knew it," Priya said. "I knew it. Lottie is one of the good ones." "She said retroactive," Sarah said. "Retroactive," Priya said. They know. They know they took from you." Sarah sat with the word retroactive for the rest of the day. It was one of those words that tried to fix a gap, and it never quite could, because time didn't work that way. You couldn't go back and give someone the confidence they would have had if they'd been promoted at the right moment, or the identity shift that came with being recognized on your own merit before you had started to wonder if you deserved it. You could give the money and the title. The rest was only ever approximate. But it was still something. It was still a correct answer arriving, even late. That Thursday, she told Damien about the promotion. He did not say, "I told you so," which she had braced for, and would not have resented, but was glad not to hear. He said, "Good. That's where it should have been a year ago." "Yes," she said. "How do you feel?" "Complicated," she said honestly. "Happy. Also aware of all the time it didn't happen." "That's fair," he said. I keep thinking about the girl who applied the first time, she said. She was already doing the work. She did the same work after being told no, and didn't let herself fall apart about it. She paused. I want to be kind to her, but I also want to tell her she should have made more noise. He was quiet for a moment. You can want both, he said. They're not in conflict. She did what she could with what she had. You know more now. She looked at him across the table. She had been looking at him across tables for nearly 3 months, and she was not yet finished noticing things about him. She noticed, today, the way he listened, not with the performed attentiveness of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with a quality of stillness that was entirely his own, as if the conversation mattered enough to receive properly. She thought about something she had not let herself think directly yet. She had been careful with this particular thought, because it was the kind that, once allowed to take its full shape, could not be put back. She had been holding it at the edge of her awareness, the way you hold something fragile, not quite willing to put it down, not quite willing to look at it directly. Damien, she said. It was the first time she had used his first name without him prompting it. He noticed. She saw him notice. He did not comment. I want to ask you something, she said. All right. What is this, she said. What we've been doing, these past 3 months. I'm not being obtuse, I know what it is to me. I'm asking what it is to you, directly, without letting the question hover over everything we're doing, without ever being named. He did not look away. You know, he said quietly. I want to hear you say it, she said. A pause, not hesitation, more like someone selecting exactly the right form of an important thing. I'm in love with you, he said. I have been for longer than is sensible, given the amount of time we've known each other, and I'm aware that the timing is complicated, and that I made a significant error of judgment, that you've generously given me the opportunity to repair, and I'm not asking you to feel the same thing. But you asked directly, and that's the direct answer. Sarah looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the window. She looked at the old dog passing outside, right on schedule, with the old man patient behind it. The timing isn't complicated, she said, and I do feel the same thing. She looked at him. But I need you to know that the reason this is possible, the reason I'm sitting here and saying that, is that you stayed honest with me after you made the mistake. You didn't try to manage me. You didn't try to minimize it. You said yes, and you waited. Yes, he said. That's the thing I need to be able to count on, she said. More than anything, I need to know that what I know about you is actually you, not a version you've arranged for my comfort. I understand, he said, and I'm telling you, it is. She exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They drank their coffee. The afternoon moved around them the way it always did, without ceremony, without announcement. 2 people at a small wooden table in a coffee shop that had been in the same spot for 15 years and had no plans to change. The third piece of the decision arrived later that week, on a quiet Friday afternoon, when Sarah was at her desk finishing notes from a recent event. Her phone lit up with a message from Damien. It said, I'm going to be in New York for 4 days next week. I'd like to tell you that in person, not by text. But I'm already late to something, and I wanted you to know before you heard nothing from me and made an incorrect assumption. She read it twice. She thought about the fact that he had specifically considered what she might think if he disappeared for 4 days, without explaining why. She thought about the specific effort that took, not a grand gesture, just a small and deliberate act of making sure she had accurate information. She wrote back, Thank you for telling me. Travel safely. Then, after a moment, she added, I'll still be at Carlo's on Thursday. He replied with a single word, Good. She put her phone down and went back to her work, and she allowed herself, for the first time in the whole of this story, to feel uncomplicated happiness. Not happiness with an asterisk, not happiness waiting for the thing that would undo it. Just the plain, warm, insufficient but real feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be. She was not done being afraid. She did not expect to stop being afraid for a while. She was a person who had practiced fear for 23 years, and you did not stop practicing something that embedded quickly. But fear and joy were not enemies exactly. They were more like 2 songs playing at the same time, and the thing was not to silence one of them but to learn how to hear the one you wanted without losing the other entirely. She had learned that in the ballroom. She had learned it dancing alone, in the dark, to songs she had never admitted she loved. It turned out you could learn a great deal from a marble floor, and a playlist, and 3 years of believing you were invisible. New York lasted 5 days, not 4. He sent a message on the 4th day, explaining that a meeting had extended, and the message was matter-of-fact and required no particular response, and she gave it one anyway, because she had discovered in recent weeks that she was no longer working very hard at performing indifference. It was an exhausting performance, and she had other things to do with her energy. She was good at her job in a new way now. Not that she had been bad at it before. She had been very good at it, quietly, without recognition. But there was a difference between doing excellent work in invisibility and doing excellent work with your name on it, and she was only now beginning to understand the difference in her body, the way you understand the difference in temperature when you step from one room into another. Lottie had given her 3 new accounts. She had also, in a Wednesday morning team meeting, cited 2 specific events by name as examples of strong coordination, both of them Sarah's work. Both of them presented accurately with Sarah's name attached. It was such a simple thing. Such a plainly decent thing. Sarah had sat in that meeting and felt the warmth of it move through her, and had also felt, quietly, a particular anger at every meeting before this one, where the same thing had not happened. She let herself feel the anger. Priya had told her once that the function of anger at a true injustice was not something to rush through. You were supposed to feel it. It was information. But she did not let the anger be bigger than the present, because the present was good, and she had worked for the present, and she was going to be in it completely. On the evening of the day Damien returned from New York, he called. She was in her kitchen, making dinner. "How was the 5 days?" she said. "The meeting extended well," he said. "The outcome was better than projected." A pause. "I thought about telling you a specific story from the 3rd day, and then realized it requires several minutes, and makes more sense in person. Is it interesting?" "It made me laugh," he said, "which is unusual during a negotiation." "I'll require it at Carlo's," she said. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she agreed. She went back to dinner. She did not examine the warmth she felt at the call in any particular analytical way. She just let it be there. Thursday came. She was at Carlo's at 4, the usual time. She had the flat white with oat milk. She was reading, or attempting to read, though she had covered the same paragraph 3 times before acknowledging that she was, in fact, listening for the door. He came in at 4:12. She saw him before he saw her, which was a reversal of the usual pattern, and she noticed that he moved through the coffee shop differently than most people, not urgently, but with a kind of settled attention, as if he were always exactly as fast as the moment required. He sat down. He ordered the cardamom coffee from memory. He looked across the table at her. "You're not reading," he said. "I was reading. You had the same page open when I came in, as you did when I sat down." "I was rereading," she said. He smiled. She had gotten used to his smiles, not frequent, not performed, but when they arrived, they changed his entire face, in a way that she had stopped trying to be neutral about. "The New York story," she said. He told her. It involved a very small miscommunication about a conference room booking that had cascaded, through a series of entirely logical individual steps, into a situation where 4 partners from 3 different time zones were attempting to have the same meeting in 2 different buildings simultaneously. The resolution required a good deal of calm improvisation and ended with everyone finally seated in the correct room with 30 minutes to spare, at which point, someone's phone had played a loud, cheerful piece of music from a notifications error, and the room had laughed, in the genuine, relieved way that people laugh when the tension has broken and they are all suddenly friends. Sarah was laughing before he finished. He watched her laugh, and she noticed him watching, and she did not moderate it. "That's an excellent story," she said. "I thought you'd like it," he said. She picked up her coffee. "I went back to the ballroom," she said. She had not planned to say it at that moment, but it came out simply. He looked at her. "When?" "3 weeks ago, a Thursday morning. I went in through the service entrance, before the rest of the staff arrived." She looked at the table surface, then back up at him. "I danced. In the morning light, with the chandeliers off. I kept the lights on." "Good," he said. "I played the first song," she said. "The one that started the whole thing. The first night I stayed late with the missed bus." She paused. "I don't think you know about that one." "No," he said. "Tell me." She told him. The missed bus, the cold, her coming back inside, because she didn't want to explain herself to Garrett. The empty ballroom, the accidental press of play, the way the piano had started and her body had moved before she'd decided to let it. She told him about the first turn in the pale courtyard light, and the way the room had felt like it was hers for a moment. He listened the whole way through. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he said, "What song was it?" She told him. He reached across the table and, without asking, found it on his own phone, and set the phone on the table between them with the volume low but audible. The opening notes of the piano filled the space around them, small from the phone speaker, still unmistakably itself. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "I didn't plan to tell you that today," she said. "I know," he said. "I think that's probably why it came out." She listened to the music for a moment. "I want to say something," she said. "All right." "I spent a very long time making myself easy to overlook," she said. "Not out of weakness, or not only that, partly out of practicality. You learn to manage the distance between what you are and what people expect you to be, and you do it so consistently that it starts to feel like that gap is just who you are. The managing of it." She paused. "What happened with you, starting from that night in the ballroom, has been the experience of someone slowly taking the managing away, and I want you to know that I'm aware of what it's cost you to be patient enough for that to happen." "It didn't cost me anything," he said. "It cost you something," she said. "You've held yourself at a particular distance that I know isn't your natural setting. I've watched you not push for things you could reasonably have asked for by now." She looked at him steadily. "I notice things." "I know you do," he said. "I'm telling you," she said carefully, "that you don't have to hold that distance anymore." He did not move immediately. He had that quality, the quality she had observed from the very beginning, of letting a moment exist before responding to it, of not rushing the space where something important was happening. Then he reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. It was a simple gesture, neither dramatic nor tentative. It was the gesture of someone who had been waiting for permission, and now had it, and was not going to make a large production of arriving. She turned her hand over, so their palms were together. They sat like that while the song played out from the phone on the table. The coffee shop moved around them, other people's conversations, the machine at the counter, the door opening and closing, the same world that had always been there. Nothing external had changed. The table was the same table. The light was the same gray afternoon light. She was the same person she had been for 23 years. But something in the arrangement of herself had shifted, finally and fully, into a configuration she recognized as honest. She was not performing being fine. She was not managing the distance between who she was and what was expected of her. She was sitting in a coffee shop with a man she had come to know in the most roundabout and unexpected way imaginable, and she was holding his hand, and she was not waiting for the part where it turned out it wasn't for her. She let it be for her. Outside the window, the old dog and the old man moved past at their usual pace. She watched them briefly, and felt something in her chest that was close to gratitude, not for any particular person or event, but for the accumulation of ordinary things that had built this moment. The missed bus, the empty ballroom, the first song, the Friday nights, the fear and the dancing, and the way a marble floor felt cool through soft shoes in the middle of the night, the anger and the apology, and the long work of figuring out how to stay in something honestly. The song ended. She didn't take her hand back immediately. Neither did he. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay. The ballroom. Your Friday nights. I know you haven't gone back on Fridays since everything." He paused. "I don't think you should give that up. That was yours before any of this." She looked at him. "You're telling me to keep going back alone?" "Not forever," he said. "I'm saying don't give up the thing that was yours, because something new came along. The thing that was yours is what showed me who you were. You shouldn't dismantle it." She thought about that. "You could come," she said slowly. "Sometime. Not every time, but sometime." He considered it. Would that be all right? She thought about the ballroom in the dark, and the ballroom in the morning light, and the first time she had danced there, and felt like the room was hers. She thought about whether an audience, specifically this audience, would change the thing itself. She found, to her own mild surprise, that the answer was no. What she did in that room was not contingent on being unseen. It had never been about the unseen, not truly. It had been about being free. And she was not less free for being known. Yes, she said, that would be all right. He nodded once, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had received information they were glad to have and intended to treat well. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. The afternoon settled around them, comfortable and unhurried, entirely itself. Same time next Thursday, she said. Same time next Thursday, he said. She left Carlo's at 5:42, which was later than usual. She walked back toward the hotel not because she needed to go there but because it was the direction she was drawn in, and halfway there she stopped on the pavement and looked up. The building was lit warmly from within, its old stonework gold in the early evening. The ivory hall's tall windows were dark from here, but she knew exactly where they were. She knew every inch of that building. She had spent years being invisible in it. She had spent Friday nights being alive in it. She stood on the pavement in the early evening, with the city moving around her, and felt, simply and without qualification, like herself. Then she turned and walked home. 2 years passed. This is the part of the story that is easiest to rush, and most important not to, because the things that changed happened slowly, and the slow change was the whole point. Sarah turned 25 on a Thursday in April. Priya and Colin both came to the dinner she didn't host. Damien had organized it with enough input from Priya that it felt exactly right rather than arranged. Colin, who had met Damien twice before this, spent most of the evening asking him careful questions the way older brothers asked careful questions, and Damien answered all of them without performing patience, because he was genuinely patient and had nothing to hide. At the end of the night, Colin pulled Sarah aside in the kitchen, on the pretense of helping carry dishes, and said, "I like him," with the simple certainty he had always used for things he actually meant. "Good," she said. "He listens when you talk," Colin said. "That's not nothing." "No," she said. "It isn't." She was senior coordinator at the Grandeur Palace, with 3 people now reporting to her. Lottie had asked her, 7 months in, whether she had considered moving into management. She had said she was considering it. She had meant it. She was considering a great many things she had not previously allowed herself to consider, because consideration required believing that the future could hold something worth planning for, and she had not always believed that. Her work had changed not in what she did, but in how she inhabited what she did. She still arranged tables and managed timelines, and solved problems that guests never knew had been problems, but she now signed the event briefs with her own name. She now sat at the front of the room in meetings, instead of 2 chairs back from the front. She now said, when something was wrong, that something was wrong, and proposed a solution in the same sentence, and did not apologize for either. She had stopped making herself easy to overlook. The interesting thing about that was how few people had objected. The version of her that she had imagined would be too much had turned out to be, mostly, entirely fine. Not to everyone. There had been one colleague who had not taken well to the realignment of what Sarah would and wouldn't carry, on behalf of other people's convenience. There had been a brief and unpleasant period. Then it had resolved. She had not compromised on anything that mattered. She and Damien did not move in together immediately. They talked about it, in the honest, practical way they talked about most things, and decided to do it slowly, which in practice meant that his things arrived in her apartment in increments over several months, so gradually that she was not sure when the apartment stopped being hers alone and became theirs together. One evening she came home and noticed his reading glasses on the kitchen counter next to her plants, and felt something close to the feeling she had described to Priya as joy without asterisks. She texted Priya the single word, "glasses." Priya replied with a very specific string of text that was entirely too dramatic and exactly right. His penthouse suite at the Grandeur Palace remained, at his insistence, an occasional professional option for when his business brought him back. She had managed 2 events during his stays there in the past year, which she had found amusingly circular, in a way she had not shared with him, because she suspected he would find it more significant than she intended, or possibly the exact amount of significance she intended. The ballroom was still hers. She had been back on Friday nights 6 times in the past year, not every week. The ritual was not about frequency, and she had learned in the past 2 years that the need for it had changed somewhat. The ballroom had been, before, the only room in the world where she was completely herself. Now there were other rooms. Her kitchen at 7 in the morning with the radio on, Priya's couch, the small reading chair by the window that had migrated from her apartment to theirs, without anyone formally deciding it was moving. She had more space in the world that belonged to her entirely, which meant the ballroom was no longer her only refuge. It was now something more refined, a choice, freely made, to return to the place where she had first learned what it felt like to be unguarded. The night Damien came with her, they had been together for 8 months. It was a Friday in late October, and the hotel had hosted a wedding that had run long and closed, with the specific kind of energy that large, joyful events left in a room, alive and warm and slightly breathless. She had managed the event, and the cleanup was done, and the staff had gone. She had asked him that morning if he wanted to come, not as a significant occasion, just, "I'm thinking about going to the ballroom tonight, if you want to come." He had said yes, without making it larger than she'd made it. She opened the service entrance. The ivory hall was dim and still, the after energy of the wedding, already fading into the familiar quiet of the space at rest. She turned the chandeliers on low, not off, not the full blaze used for events, but the warm low setting she had discovered by accident one night and kept. The marble floor was clean. The chairs were stacked at the far walls. The room smelled of cut flowers and the particular fresh linen scent the cleaners used. She put on her soft shoes. He stood near the service entrance, coat in hand, watching her with that quality of attention that she had grown familiar with over the months. Not passive, not evaluating, just fully present. The kind of watching that didn't require anything from you. She pressed play. The first song started. She moved into it, the way she always moved into it, finding the rhythm naturally, without preamble, her arms finding their own balance. She was not performing for him. She had known she would not perform for him, because she had stopped performing for anyone, and because he was not the kind of person who required a performance. She danced for one full song, then she stopped and looked at him. "I don't know how," he said. He was not being self-deprecating. He was stating a fact. "That doesn't matter," she said. She walked to him and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands and then back at her. "I'm going to step on your feet," he said. "Probably," she agreed. He stepped on her feet twice in the first 2 minutes. He was not graceless by nature, but dancing required a specific surrender of intention that did not come naturally to a person who moved through the world with a great deal of intention. She could feel him working out what to let go of. She waited for it. It happened somewhere in the middle of the second song. Something in his shoulders dropped, slightly, and his movement stopped being about the steps and became about the music, and for a few minutes, he was simply moving with her, in a large empty room, in the low-lit quiet, and it was nothing like what she did alone, but it was entirely its own thing, and it was good. They danced badly, and then less badly for an hour. At the end, she sat on the low stage at the far end of the room, the same stage she had sat on the very first night, and he sat beside her, and they were both slightly out of breath and not talking. She looked at the room. The chandeliers, the long windows with the city outside, the marble floor she had swept and arranged and staffed and hidden herself in for 3 years. "This is where it started," she said, not to him specifically, to the room. "Yes," he said. She thought about the girl who had stood here at midnight, dancing to a song nobody else knew she loved, believing with absolute certainty that she was invisible. She thought about what it would mean to tell that girl what the next 3 years would look like. She thought the girl probably wouldn't have believed her. "You weren't invisible," Damien said. He had the occasional quality of seeming to know where her thoughts were without being told, which she had found unsettling at first, and now found simply accurate. "You were just waiting." "For what?" He was quiet for a moment. In the considered way he was always quiet. "For someone to make it safe enough," he said. "To be seen." She sat with that for a while. The chandeliers made a very soft sound. Not quite a hum, more a presence, like a room breathing. The city outside was a low and constant murmur. "I think I made it safe enough myself," she said. "Eventually." "Yes," he said. "You did. That's the whole story." She looked at him. In the low warm light of the ballroom, he looked like exactly what he was, a man she had not expected and could not have invented, sitting beside her on a stage in a room that was hers, honest and present and not going anywhere. "Not the whole story," she said. "Ongoing." He smiled. "Ongoing," he agreed. She stood up. She offered him her hand, because she wanted to, and he took it, because he always did. They walked out of the ivory hall together, through the service corridor, out into the October night. The city was cool and lit and moving, indifferent to them in the best possible way, the way cities are indifferent to everyone equally and without malice. She did not look back at the hotel, because she didn't need to. She carried the ballroom with her now the way you carry anything that has become part of who you are. Not as a memory exactly, not as a place you had to return to, but as an understanding. An understanding that the most important thing she had ever done was refuse, eventually, to be smaller than she was. Not for him, not for the promotion, not for the approval of anyone watching. For herself, in a marble-floored room, alone at midnight, with no audience but the chandeliers and the city light, and a song she had never admitted she loved. That had been enough to start everything. And the story, the real one, was still going. The plants on the windowsill of their apartment were thriving. She talked to them on Tuesday mornings. He pretended not to hear, but she had seen him, twice, moving the smaller one to a better spot in the light, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She paid attention to everything. She always had. It had just taken her a while to point that attention at herself.